It has been over 500 days since our last PlayStation showcase that was full of awesome reveals, including Marvel's Spider-Man 2, Marvel's Wolverine, a Knights of the Old Republic remake, and much more. Unfortunately, since those reveals, there has been a lack of any new information regarding those games. This has left gamers confused, and some have begun to lose patience. Trust me, I see all of the comments on my videos with fans voicing their frustrations. Some of those frustrations are warranted, and some of them I believe are a little overdramatic. But after seeing the endless comments of fans reacting to the lack of news for some of these titles over the past few months, it has left me questioning whether or not publishers are announcing games far too soon. For example, during the last PlayStation showcase back in 2021, there was an announcement for a Knights of the Old Republic remake coming to the PS5. However, the latest word on that game is that development is at a standstill and the future is uncertain. I believe that this is a case of a game being announced far too soon. Did it make sense to announce a game that had barely scratched the surface of development? Well, no. All it did was get people hyped and later disappointed. Or in the case of Marvel's Wolverine, it was really nice and exciting to see that Insomniac Games would be creating another single-player Marvel game, but realistically that game was probably 4 years away from being released at the time of its announcement. However, in the case of Marvel's Spider-Man 2, I don't think it was necessarily too early to show or announce anything. It was a game that everyone knew was coming at some point in time, so there really was no real surprise factor when it came to announcing it back in 2021, but one common thing that I see from people on YouTube is that they showcase the game too early. And to those people I ask, how would you feel right now if you didn't see that initial trailer in 2021? I'd imagine that if PlayStation waited this long to show anything for the game, that there would be a panic and fear amongst gamers that the game's going to be delayed or there's something massively wrong with it. In my humble opinion, I believe that there is an art to announcing games properly. If it's a game that's already expected, then I would prefer to see a trailer as soon as the game is ready to be showcased. However, if a brand new game is being announced, then I would prefer to not see it until it's getting closer to it being finished. This would put far less pressure on developers to hit a deadline or meet expectations. I honestly believe that Spider-Man Miles Morales was a perfectly announced game to fans. No one knew this game was even being made until about a half a year away from it being released. It was a great surprise that fans didn't have to wait too long to get their hands on. The game was nearly complete, and it was announced at a time where Insomniac felt really comfortable with where they were in development. So now that you've heard my opinion and where I stand on announcing games, I'd like to bring in our Spidey Squad creator and leader, Evan Filarca, to share his opinion on this topic. Evan, thanks so much for joining me on the channel, and feel free to share your thoughts or disagree with me if you need to on whether or not games are being announced far too soon.
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me on your channel, Keenan. It truly means the world to me, and I love being able to collaborate with you any chance I get. And for starters, when it comes to games being marketed, it pretty much is an art form in and of itself. There are a lot of games, of course, like what we are all looking forward to right now with Marvel's Spider-Man 2, which don't necessarily need to be marketed considering how popular the IP of Spider-Man is. Any type of Spider-Man related thing in this instance, considering how great of a job Insomniac have done with the first game and Miles Morales, whatever new Marvel game they make next, whether that be Spider-Man 2 or Wolverine, is already going to receive a massive amount of interest from fans, considering how massively popular those characters are, but also in regards to the word of mouth and faith that people have in the developer of Insomniac Games themselves. So even though we haven't even seen gameplay yet of Marvel's Spider-Man 2, we all know that the excitement that people are going to have for the game is going to be through the roof by the time we see more of it. And because of that, a game like that is allowed to get away with being revealed a bit too early, but still the waiting period for a game like Marvel's Spider-Man 2 may not be justifiable enough for people who do want their games to be released. I would say at least in the span of half a year after the game is revealed to then being released, like what we saw with Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, where the game was initially revealed during the June PlayStation Showcase of 2020 to then release in November of 2020 in that same year. However, it was different for that game considering its standalone spin-off nature and being a smaller game in scope and scale compared to the first Marvel Spider-Man title, but that marketing campaign that Miles Morales had was a huge turnaround in comparison to the year-long wait that we did previously experience with Spider-Man PS4 and the more than year-long wait that we now have with Marvel Spider-Man 2. And even in regards to another Marvel game, like what Keenan mentioned earlier, with Marvel's Wolverine, that game was revealed in 2021, but it may not end up releasing until either 2024 or 2025, which means it'll be an either 3 or 4 year long wait until that Marvel game releases. Now granted, we have a lot of other games to look forward to before that game launches, but only focusing on Wolverine directly, I personally believe that the wait for that title is not totally justified given how little we know about it and that we have more games to look at until that game launches. So if anything, the only real reason why Insomniac and PlayStation decided to showcase Wolverine in the first place was only to garner more hype and interest into the Marvel Games brand, rather than having them promote both Marvel's Spider-Man 2 and Marvel's Wolverine simultaneously. And this is where I want to get to my own example of a game that doesn't even need to be marketed at all and can simply only rely on the goodwill and intentions that the developer has. If any of you are in the gaming space, you might know of a title called Forspoken, which was one of the massive first-party titles that did recently release on the PlayStation 5 exclusively. And when it was initially revealed, it did have a lot of marketing interest behind it, but the overall waiting period that we had to endure for that game was extremely jarring and not entertaining for the fanbase who was interested in that game, even though it was a brand new IP with no big backing like a company from Marvel or Warner Brothers / DC, for example, to gain interest, and merely was interested inside the game world itself. But it ended up not doing too great in terms of reviews, and is kind of garnered as one of the more lackluster titles that has released recently on the PlayStation platform. And this brings me to Hi-Fi Rush, which is another awesome game that released exclusively on the Xbox. But the crazy thing about that game in particular is that it was completely shadow dropped by Xbox and the developer behind it of Tango Gameworks with no marketing whatsoever. They revealed the game and released it the same exact day. And through the great word of mouth that came from gamers who ended up playing the game and buying it, as well as them releasing it at a lower price rate at around $30 to $40 compared to the $70 price tag that was attached to Forspoken, it ended up getting even more sales and outperforming Forspoken in only the span of a couple weeks. And that's crazy considering how big of a marketing budget that PlayStation put behind Forspoken in comparison to the absolute ninja-like nature that was forced into Hi-Fi Rush, which ended up being a huge success for the game in the long run. So I pretty much bring all this up because there are a lot of different ways that companies can go about marketing their product, whether that be waiting for a couple years or release the game the same exact day they announce the trailer for it. But it needs to be in favor of the consumer, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who are putting their money on the line to decide whether or not they should spend money and actually give the companies an income as to whether or not their games are worth their hard-earned cash. And because of that, it's definitely clear to see how well Marvel's Spider-Man 2 and Marvel's Wolverine are going to sell by the time they release those games from the PlayStation Studios production lineup. But for other games that may not have that huge benefit of a popular IP behind the product, that is where the companies need to think more strategically as to how they want to promote and market their games to their larger consumer fan base. And hopefully, by the time more games start coming out in the years to come, like what we're going to see this year of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, and only getting small bits and pieces of a story trailer and a little small gameplay trailer throughout the span of 3 years, since it was supposed to come out in 2022 and it got delayed to this year in 2023, we will see whether or not that game will actually hold its bearings by the time it does release later in May of 2023. But for the majority of these other games, they really need to start thinking a bit more practical and realistically in terms of how they want to showcase these games in a thoroughly efficient way that will gain interest from the consumer, but will also not make them feel alienated by the time they go dark without promoting their game at all.
If there's one thing that I think that game developers and just publishers can learn from recent examples is that with established properties, it's probably a little bit easier to promote those games. You don't need a big release window or a big buildup in terms of marketing for those established properties. So, in my opinion, announcing something like a Wonder Woman game or a Captain America and Black Panther game could probably wait. And I get that they're excited and they want people to get hyped about these games. But the thing is, those are established IPs that people are going to show up for no matter what. The longer you make people wait, the more people could possibly be concerned. Let's say a year or two goes by and we've heard nothing for the Black Panther and Captain America game. People are going to start to wonder, hey, we heard about this game about 3 years ago and we still know nothing about it. I think companies can learn something from this when it comes to the bigger releases. It's okay to wait on the marketing and announcing these games until it gets closer to the release date and you feel comfortable where you can show off some of this gameplay from these games and start making that marketing push. So that's just what I hope people can take away from this video. Evan, I just want to say thank you so much for your thoughts on this. It sounds like we're mostly in agreement, and I feel like we're both pretty passionate about this subject. I thought you brought some really good points to the table, and I just want to say thank you so much for joining me on this video.
Thank you very much for having me, Keenan. It's always a pleasure to be able to collaborate with you, and I can't wait to hopefully see more marketing soon for all these incredible games that we're looking forward to in the future.
You guys know the deal. Go ahead and subscribe to Evan's channel if you haven't already. The link to his channel will be in the description. Subscribe to my channel if you want to keep up with other Marvel Spider-Man 2 related content in the future. And until next time, we will talk to you guys later.